Hello, everyone. Good morning. Yes, that is Taylor Swift who's playing in the background. Everyone who's piling in, jump in the chat, and I want you to tell me your name, your role, and what company you're coming from. This is the first webinar that I'm doing where it's just me. So you guys are subject to some random music tastes that I have. We'll wait a couple minutes while everyone comes in. Postman. Wait, so now I'm confused because Johnny, you said your name is Francisco. So is your name Francisco or Johnny? What's up, everyone? Hey, Celine, Cody, Adrian, what's going on? Oh, you invited your colleague, Francisco. I was wondering if you moonlight. 7 shifts. We got a lot of SDRs in here. That's awesome. We're going to get started here in about 1 minute. We can let Taylor play a little bit longer. I also want everyone who's in here to give me your favorite Taylor Swift song. And on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you like Taylor Swift? Ooh, blank space. 0. Emily, you're a 0 for Taylor? Cody's a 0 too? No one likes Taylor Swift in here. We got a trouble. Okay, we got 100%. Megan, you're my girl. This is so funny. Oh my gosh, no one likes Taylor. I am tanking. This is my first webinar that I'm doing just by myself with no host. You guys are making it an awful experience. Right. Brian said, who doesn't like T-Swizzle? It's just wrong. All the people who don't like Taylor Swift, who hurt you? Who hurt you in your lifetime? Awesome. Well, why don't we go ahead and kick off here. So welcome everyone to how to hook personalization to relevance. Taylor just said gets annoying after a while. Did you mean me or did you mean Taylor Swift? Because certainly you didn't mean Taylor Swift. Welcome and how to hook personalization to relevance. So I'm going to jump in here, but I want this to be super informal. So I'm going to be doing a couple of housekeeping items. I'm doing 2 webinars per month as part of 2021. I'm going to be doing a webinar on the 2nd Wednesday of every single month, and I will be joined by a guest. So we just had James Nielsen from Vendition. He's a CEO over there, their recruiting company, and he covered 7 things that your SDRs need to know. It was a really good session, 7 things your SDRs need to know whenever they're ramping to hit quota. So if you want to check that one out, it's on demand. And this one, the 3rd Wednesday of every single month, I'm going to be basically covering a topic, likely a topic that I have seen a lot of people have been watching in the hub. So the more you guys watch those videos, the more I'm ticking them up and saying like, okay, what are the most prevalent topics? So today we're going to do how to hook personalization to relevance. I think a very apropos topic for the time, but the next one, just a heads up, I'm going to probably release this tomorrow, is going to be breakup emails. So it's February next month, which means it's Valentine's Day. So as a part of that, I wanted to do how to break up in a really, really highly attractive manner. So if you haven't registered for that one and you want to check it out, then you can go in, and it is live, I believe, as of last night. So you guys can check that out. But without further ado, thank you everyone for coming. I'm going to go ahead and broadcast my deck here, but I want this to be a very, very informal, interactive session. So if you guys wouldn't mind, as kind of a starting point, I cannot encourage questions enough. Questions make this super fun for me, and I get to know you guys and what you really want to know about the topic. So if you have any questions along the way on anything, then just pile them up in there, and I'll be periodically checking the chat to see what you guys have to say. But if you wouldn't mind starting by, while I'm kicking off here, going ahead and jumping in the chat and giving me kind of a slug line of why this was a hot topic for you and why you wanted to, essentially hear anyone talk about this. But that would be really helpful. It's just a base point of why this was an interesting topic for you today. And we'll go ahead and kick off here. So from a high level, I know there's a lot of different back and forth in the industry, and you've got two basically different camps. You've got the personalization camp, that's manned by a couple of different thought leaders, and then you have the relevance only camp. And so I think one of the innate things that happened whenever I started developing the concept of personalization at scale, so this was back 3 years ago, I basically came across the recognition that relevance only wasn't working for my teams anymore. And what I mean by relevance, we'll go into a definition of that, and personalization, what a definition of that is too. It wasn't working for me. Relevance only wasn't working for me to really get the massive results that I wanted. So I wanted to be your typical like 200% of quota rep. And so I started personalizing, and two of the biggest things that I knew that I needed to counter in the industry were how to essentially maintain consistency and infrastructure within messages. So, if I have a team of 20, let's say, or I'm an SDR, like how do I make it repeatable and how do I speed it up? And then how on earth do I scale it? So that's really where I started. The results I've been seeing, the results I saw with my first team within 2 weeks, we 4x'd our numbers. Second team, we 3x'd. My third team, we 7x'd. And then a few of the companies that I've been able to get the pleasure to work with over the last few months, have seen anywhere from 3x to 8x. But anecdotally, I've been getting a lot of your outreach from people in the community saying they're deploying some kind of personalization process, and they're seeing really, really great results. So today I wanted to take a little bit of a different slant. So there are some, I think I got the reputation somehow that I recommend personalization in all cases, which is a funny accusation. So to go on record, I do not recommend personalization in all cases. In most cases I do, though. And so I wanted to really put together an entire deck on some of the playbook of personalization, so I could go a little bit click deeper than just personalization at scale, but also some of the pains, some of the potholes that you need to watch out for. And, with anything that's good, you're going to have a little bit of kickback. So, one of the main concepts that really came up, oddly enough, again, in the industry was I got the accusation of I'm personalization girl, but I'm not relevance girl. And I would just warn everyone with my fire opinion that I came from relevance, right? So today I wanted to unpack how to systematically, repeatably, sustainably hook personalization to relevance. So I am by design an anti 10-80-10 rule girl. So 10-80-10 for everyone on the line that doesn't know, a 10-80-10 essentially is going to be where 10% is personalized, 80% is not personalized, and 10% is personalized. And the dangers of that is that essentially with your prospect, they start to think that it's disingenuine. They start to think that, essentially you are only personalizing to them because you wanted to get a hold of their attention. So I have seen with a lot of different reps that the massive results will come when you are hooking that into what is relevant to them in terms of their buyer persona. Before I get going here, I haven't seen any comments here, so let me make sure. You guys, can all of you see my screen or no? No, you can't. Okay, I thought everyone could see my screen. Okay, that's why that was doing that. So I'm going to go ahead and broadcast. Can you see it now? Awesome. Okay, great. So these are great questions. Keep them piling in here. Yeah, so why don't we go ahead and kick off here, but I want to lead here with the definitions, essentially. So you're going to see a lot of different confusing, conflicting advice on this topic. And the reality is because personalization is relatively new. It's not new it's relatively new and it's relatively old. you know, people as a, you know, back in the olden days when I first started selling, you know, I was always personalized. I knew who my buyer was, you know, I knew everything about them. I think very Michael Scott in The Office when he knows, you know, he goes and visits and gives the gift baskets to all of his clients. And one of the clients, he's like, hey, here's the gift basket. By the way, you know, your daughter, Emily, I know she's allergic to walnuts, so those are in there. So, you know, watch out. So today I really wanted to bring some of those quote unquote older flavors of how to, you know, be very, very tailored to the person you're talking to and pair that in with what is relevant to them in terms of their buyer persona, their role, their company, et cetera. So let's start with the definition so we can kind of define the ground that we're combating about. So whether anyone likes it or not, no matter what LinkedIn says, personalization is defined as something to meet someone's individual requirements. So this isn't me, this is Google, essentially kicking this definition out. But it's basically, it is one-to-one by definition. So personalization, essentially, you should not be able to replicate to another human being. And I think why, if I had to guess why these teams were seeing such amazing results, is because personalization by and large has not been done before. You know, what is the one thing about someone, you know, that I can then hook into, you know, what they, what's relevant to them in their roles. So there's a couple of examples here. I really do 5 buckets of personalization. And these are ranked in order of where you should see the most conversion. So the first bucket is self-authored, and I'm going to be very high level here because I know a lot of you have watched the Personalization at Scale session, but the first bucket is going to be self-authored content. So again, personalization is one-to-one only. So it is not just what's relevant to them in their buyer persona, role, company, industry, et cetera, but it is one-to-one only. So the first type of personalization that you can do is self-authored content. This is any kind of posts that your prospect wrote, you know, any kind of articles that they wrote or any kind of webinar that they were part of. And I always have the asterisk mark in here of whatever you pick out, you need to be sure that you essentially are thinking of it, not in terms of what's a great personalized premise, but what's a great personalized premise that I can then hook back into my relevant value prop, because that's kind of the rules of the game for today. But first bucket's going to be self-authored content. If I had to guess why this is such a prevalent bucket, it's because, you know, after I jump off the line, I'm going to be asking myself one question about this session. And I want you guys to jump in the chat and guess what the question is. I'm going to walk around my apartment here and I'm going to ask myself. I'm going to get super existential about this. I'm going to wait on you guys. Let's see if anyone nails it. $5 Starbucks gift card to the first person who nails it. The question. No one's jumping in yet. Why? That is, yes, Grace, you got it. $5 Starbucks gift card to you. I'll even sign it. You're probably like, it's less valuable that way. But yes, did I do good? I will be wondering if you guys, right, did I deliver good content? Brian, you nailed it too. I will be wondering if you guys thought this was relevant. Did you think it was worth your time? You know, did you like the content? Did you think it was different? Did you get something out of it? Was there a very clear takeaway, etc.? So those are all those are the risks of posting on social media. So whenever someone posts content on social media, the one thing that they want is engagement. You know, they want likes, they want shares, they want comments, they want everyone to see the validity and what they are sharing. So if social media, I want you to think very, very heavily about the beast that social media is to understand human psychology. Of social media has proven to us that number one, we all want to be famous. And number two, that we crave as a human race validation. So that's why when people want to go viral, they want attention. Mom, look. So self-authored content is a great way with your prospect. And again, I always predicate the rule that you need to be thinking through not what article did they write, but what article did they write that I can then hook back to realistically with a play on words back to what my company does? So self-authored content, you can see anywhere from 90 to 95% conversion rate. I have, gotten some enterprise logos within minutes, by knowing something about the content they wrote. So this is, not only conveying to your prospect that you saw what they wrote, but it's very, very valid. I remember the first time I did a piece of content, I did it with AISP and I did it on KPI systems because I was like, oh, people are going to love this. And I just started talking nerdy KPI systems, inbound, outbound, et cetera. And I remember the first person that reached out to me and said, I liked that session. Would you be willing to, answer a couple questions on a call? And I remember thinking in my head, dude, I will give you the keys to my car. Like, you liked my content, So this can be very, very powerful whenever leveraged appropriately. Number 2 is going to be engaged content. This is anything that your prospect has liked, shared, or commented on. It's not quite as strong because, again, if I had to guess, they're not the hero in this situation. So the person who's the hero is the person who wrote the content, essentially, but it's still strong, especially if you're going to go into their comments on someone else's post, then you're getting back into their herodom. The third bucket of personalization as a bucket that you can do is self-identified traits. And this is going to be things that people wrote about themselves essentially online. So their profile line, their headline, their company line, et cetera. Those are going to be all of the places where their about me section essentially can be a gold mine. And this is a gold mine for people. If you sell a very technical product, and you say like, oh, people aren't making hundreds of posts. Like I saw a post about that the other day of like, oh, you can't personalize unless they're making hundreds of posts. The reality is that especially if you're selling into an HR, marketing, sales development, sales ops, or revenue ICP, I would say you can get some kind of hook within the first 3 buckets 85 to 90% of the time. I want to be very clear, no one's going to write an article that says, for instance, I'm going to scroll up here to someone's company. So Cody, no one's going to write an article that says the reasons why I want Salealytics. Here's the top 5 reasons why I want you to sell me that product. They're not going to do it. Or no one to Adrian's company is going to write a post saying, I really want Bright Cove, and here are the reasons why. So essentially, before you go over the mental climb of, oh, there's nothing here that I can use, I would view personalization as the following. I don't know if anyone's seen the movie Apollo 13. Apollo 13, but essentially, Apollo 13 is one of my favorite movies, top 10. And in Apollo 13, I like space movies in general, but in Apollo 13, there is a scene where essentially they are trying to get the crew back down to Earth. And to do that, they have to find a way to supply enough oxygen, and so there's a room where basically one of the leaders of the NASA crew on the floor walks into a room and he says, we need to build a filter. And he takes a bag of stuff and he shakes it out on a table and he says, this is the stuff that we have on deck. How do we do it? So the reason why I push people to personalize is because I know that it works. It just works, right? So I would view it as I am hungry to come to this person's profile and essentially find something in a quick manner that I can then pull back into my value prop. But for a super technical, there are very few buyer personas that are not on LinkedIn. I would say developers, by and large, are not on LinkedIn. But a CFO, for instance, anyone in finance teams, they're on LinkedIn. They might not be super, super active in posting content all the time. But if I have a ICP that essentially, or a buyer persona that is not super active on LinkedIn, but is on LinkedIn, then bucket 3 is for me. Self-identified traits is the about me section, the headline, and the profile line. When someone signed on LinkedIn, essentially they were viewing LinkedIn as a resume. In the beginning, it wasn't such a community feel. It was, I want to market essentially myself to random people. And so they had to, by default, create some kind of about me section. So this is a quick, no matter what happens, even if they're not posting, commenting, etc. You know, and I can't tell you again, I can't stress this enough, the amount of sessions that I've gone in where my reps would just bring me profiles of people saying they couldn't find anything. And 92% of the time I could find something within 30 seconds. So I would challenge myself to not take the easy way out and say, like, I'm going to find this piece of personalized data within these first 3 buckets simply because I know that it works. I'm going to have higher conversion in this. But if you can't, if you have a very technical buyer persona, you know, that's on LinkedIn but is not super active, then I would use the 3rd bucket here: self-identified traits, profile line, headline, the about me section, etc., where I could source data. Number 4 is going to be a personalization is going to be the junk drawer. So this is going to be personal interests, schools, you know, you get the point. Non-business related stuff that's on social media. So you'll see a lot of marketers putting this on online, or HR, or there's certain buyer personas who offer this up more readily. Sales leaders also offer this stuff up more readily. So we're talking schools, you know, we're talking languages they speak, you know, different clubs that they're interested in or a part of, you know, things, pro bono work that they've done, or any kind of Habitat for Humanity, etc. You know, but essentially the junk drawer, not to put Habitat for Humanity in the junk drawer, just to be careful on that one. But the junk drawer is basically going to be non-business related items about someone that they're putting on LinkedIn. So a couple that I put in the junk drawer just because of their nature, but are business related, is mutual connections and recommendations. I see those, and skill endorsements. I put all of those in the junk drawer because, you know, I've never been like, oh, I go to someone's profile and I'm like, oh, wow, I really respect them. They have 72 skill endorsements for closing. You know, so I would put those affectionately in junk drawer. Some ICPs, this is going to work better than others. Again, marketing, HR, operations, and sales leader, SDR leader, you know, etc. Those are going to, the junk drawer premises are going to work, you know, in my experience, much better. And then the 5th one is going to be company level data. The reason I call this personalization, this is the only arguably non-personalized bucket in these 5 buckets, but it's kind of like, it's not a liquid, it's not a solid, it's a gel, because this should be company data that's personalized to their company in specific. So you could arguably scale that across different buyer personas, you know, within that company. But that's why I put it in this personalized bucket. This is going to be the least effective bucket in terms of conversion. And, you know, again, if I had to guess why, it's because, you know, what matters, except for business owners aside, what matters to the company is going to matter to the person who works there, but not nearly as much as what matters to them in specific. So, you know, if you talk to me, you talk about flip the script, and that is personalization. You know, I own it, right? But most people, unless they are a business owner, and I want you to think through the mechanics, always challenge what I'm saying or what anyone is saying against your current logic system. You know, like, I would ask myself, if I work for IBM, is something that happens to IBM as important as something that happens in my personal life? Well, probably not. Maybe if I had something to do with that thing that happened at IBM, you know, but usually when you're starting to talk company level stuff, you're not talking about the person in specific. So you're going to see less response rates, you know, in terms of the other buckets. So those are all the 5 buckets of personalization that you can really run. If you think of something else, you know, if you think of something I didn't list here, then, you know, go ahead and ping me. I'm always looking to add. But let's go into the difference. The difference, no matter what anyone says, Google will tell you that the difference between personalization and relevance is that relevance is one-to-many, regardless of what that one-to-many flavor is: industry vertical, buyer persona, you know, role, you know, company firmographic criteria, etc. Relevance is one-to-many, and personalization is one-to-one. So I do not consider business acumen personalization. It's relevance. If you can scale it across marketers, then you not to get nitty gritty on the details, but the reason I'm getting nitty gritty on the details is because relevance is not going to give you the results, in my experience, that personalization will give you. So again, I was running an aggressive relevant playbook based on vertical, tech stack. Oh my gosh, I did everything. Buyer persona. I had a 27 cadence grid system based on different pieces of tech stack for one cadence in specific when I first started this, before I started doing personalization. It still wasn't getting the results that I want. So relevance is going to be defined as it's appropriate to, whatever time period, circumstances, interests, something closely connected to what something is being done at scale, at some definition of scale. So personalization is one-to-one. It's about Beck only. Relevance is going to be what CEOs of small peon SMB companies, if you can define me as SMB, it's just me and my fish. It would be CEOs would be relevant. Personalization would be what about Beck, in specific. So the three types of relevance that I've seen it defined as is number one, demographic. So this is going to be buyer persona relevant by and large. And you probably likely, if you're running a template game, this is usually where I see people double down. Buyer persona, what matters to them in terms of discipline of role. I have very rarely seen people go to level of role, which if I were doing relevance only, I would also include that. What matters to a manager of sales is different than what matters to a VP. Typically, if you're talking enterprise at least, then they're very, very different in terms of their role of a first line manager versus second line versus third line. But demographic is going to be anything that usually a B2C marketer would use, but it's down to, in this case scenario for our today's use case, is going to be buyer persona relevance. Number two is firmographic. So this is going to be anything about a company, usually B2B style marketers will use this. So firmographic data is a way to segment different companies from one another. So the two most common that I see within most industries is industry segment. Is this MarTech, or is this sales tech, or is this fintech, or is it not tech? But what is the industry? Oh, I'm sorry, that's vertical. Industry segment is going to be employee bandwidth. So is this, I've seen people define SMB, general business, mid-market, enterprise, and strategic as a lot of different things. Somewhere in the realm, usually I see SMB anywhere from 0 to 200 employees. Mid-market, usually what I typically see defined is anywhere from 200 to 800. Enterprise, is anywhere from 800 to 1,000 plus. And then strategic is usually defined as somewhere around, 5,000, 3,000, 5,000 employees. Then people will call it strategic. But essentially the differences between those segments is usually how I see people defining relevant cadences. I have a good question here from Emily that I want to stop and answer. Would you be able to talk about the relationship between enterprise and this kind of tech? And I recently switched from SDR to enterprise SDR, and I'm seeing these sales processes taking much longer. How do we keep their attention throughout that time? So Emily, I would ask the question of, do you mean how to sell differently to enterprise, or do you mean how to engage with people differently to get more meetings? If you wouldn't mind answering that. And I'll cover engage differently. So here's the thing. Another myth that I hope that I have blown up to the high heavens is you're going to hear from, quote unquote, whatever. You're going to hear from people in the industry that you should only use personalization on enterprise. Okay, I'm going to try and not get heated on this one. It's not like I'm a director of marketing at an SMB company and I hate you knowing who I am. And then I go to IBM as a director of marketing, and all of a sudden I really value personalization. The appetite for personalization is arguably higher at SMB and mid-market. And the reason being is someone who works for LinkedIn usually gets some attention, because of credibility, label, etc. SMB companies and mid-market, not so much, right? So the person who doesn't get individualized attention usually values it more heavily. So the higher you go, SVP, et cetera, they got a ton of people who want to talk to them. You got someone who's a frontline manager, you don't have so many people who want to talk to them or who spend that amount of attention on them. So SMB companies, they're not the big bad boy or girl in the industry yet. And so I would say that it actually works it's more prevalent in SMB and mid-market. And I want you to run the math. It takes the exact same amount of time to write a personalized email to someone who's at SMB than it does enterprise. And the results I've had, regardless of segment, are anywhere from at minimum 3x to 8x in terms of demo count. So the only thing that's really going to vary in terms of your engagement is just that I'm going to include more people from that company within enterprise. I arguably have, if let's say, my last company, Chorus, we had 5 different disciplines that we sold into: sales ops, rev, sales enablement, SDR, and sales. So at an SMB company, I'll maybe have 3 to 5 people that I could reach out to with that level or that type of role. Within mid-market, I might have upwards of 20. Within enterprise, I might have upwards of anywhere from 25 to 50. But the point being, the approach still stays the same. So, you're going to get more demos by using a personalized approach. By and large, it's a blanket statement, but you're going to get more you're going to get more demos from personalization. Doesn't matter if they're at an SMB company or an enterprise company. From my perspective and the numbers that I've run, I've used the exact same approach across all 3 teams. Of you want to do research quickly, you want to have a personalized line, you want to hook that into relevance, and then you want to stick the landing in the CTA. So I want to blow up the camp entirely of you should only use it on enterprise, because again, in my experience, this is just me, and it could be all the companies that I've been working with, and I've been working with a lot of different buyer personas. It's just going to drive more numbers. It's going to drive more numbers whether you're a mid-market rep. It's going to drive more numbers whether you're an SMB rep, or it's going to drive more numbers whether you're an enterprise rep. Now, your KPI is probably going to be lower if you're an enterprise rep. I've seen anywhere from 20 meetings for SMB, 15 meetings. It depends on if you're inbound, outbound, all bound, but 20 meetings, 15 meetings, and 10 meetings. But the type of language that you would use to engage someone, the only thing that would arguably change is maybe their value prop. And again, like people usually don't get into their value prop and the differences between how you cater to enterprise, because it's just a first meeting. So I would say the comment or the myth that you should only use it on enterprise is probably the most biggest pothole for people to fall into, because they say, oh, well, I'm not an enterprise rep, so I shouldn't be doing this. So it couldn't get more logical. So we're going to go into, I can even go into a little bit of the math of personalization, because there are no rules, because I have no host, at the end of this session. But essentially, you should be looking to send at minimum 30 emails per day, and at minimum making 60 dials per day. I would say each email is worth 2 dials. So for my reps, there's certain parts of the cadence or sequence, for instance, that you will be doing dials only. I would essentially say, okay, well, I'm going to evaporate my emails, and there were 30 emails, multiplied by 2, because they should be worth 2 dials a piece. So I should do 120 dials per day if I'm doing dials only. If I'm doing emails only, then the dial allotment was 60 dials divided by 2 for emails. So I should be doing 60 emails if I'm doing emails only. For the personalized emails that I am writing, there is 5 emails within each sequence that I'm doing. 3 of the 5 are what I would call high personalization emails, and they should take absolutely no longer than 8 minutes to fill in the blanks, in the Mad Libs blanks. So if you want to see some of the structure, I refuse to product pitch, but if you go to go.reggie.io, I have a full integration. You can check out all the messaging there. But essentially, I put together like a Mad Libs framework, of like, put personalized premise here, put the personalized excerpt here, this is how you hook it, etc. But it was taking my reps no longer than 8 minutes for those high personalization emails. For the 2 emails, which is email 2 and 5, that is low personalization emails, it was literally them just pretty much checking dynamic tags. Jay, it's go.reggie.io. Reggie.io. Actually, that might not be the correct link. So I'll send out a link in the after email, so you guys can check out the language. But 8 minutes for your high personalization emails, which should be 3 out of the 5. 5 minutes for the low personalization emails, which should be 2 out of the 5. And when I say upper limit, I mean upper limit. not only me, I was getting down to 30 seconds because essentially I was just checking dynamic tags and shipping them. And then for the low personalization emails, for the high personalization emails, it was taking me like 3 minutes to fill in the blanks and then just ship it. So I was even pulling out the low personalization emails from my reps activity metric, and they were still hitting the activity metric. So what's even more maddening about the argument against personalization, not to go on a tangent, but the average activity metric, I was on the phone last night with Dan Gottlieb over at Topo. There's two major research firms. It's going to, Topo, Forrester, and then Topo was acquired by Gartner. You got Forrester, and then you have Bridge Group, Trish Bertuzzi over at Bridge Group. Shout out Trish if you're on the line. So Trish and her research team found that the average activity metric for the industry is 35 dials per day. Okay. And Topo found that it was 40. Okay. Let's say it's higher. Let's say it's 40 dials per day. My reps at minimum, even with personalization, were not only tying the relevance only camp, they were exceeding it. They were exceeding at minimum 60 dials, and my aggressive reps were getting up to 100, because essentially it should take you no longer to make a personalized dial than an unpersonalized dial. You're just hitting the phone either way. You save the personalized premises at the onset, that how long it should take you to research, no longer than 5 minutes. You can tease out the 3 personalized premises, and I'm going to teach you how to do those in a couple of seconds. But tease out the 3 personalized premises. It should take no longer than 5 minutes. Save them into the custom tags. If you're using outreach, go to their CS line and ask them for the quote unquote, you're going to think I'm a prick, backhaul and special, and they'll ship in the custom tags for you. Sales loft, the exact same thing. And you should be able to do this research in 5 minutes and be able to just be pumping these emails out, and your conversion rates are just going to spike. So the argument that you cannot scale personalization is false. If you define scale as results, you can blow your results out of the water. Again, 3x at minimum is my experience. If you define it as the average activity metric, I was almost doubling the average activity metric for people who are doing relevance only. So I mean this to say, I am not against anyone. I mean this to say that this is working for people in a very, very deep way. And when I make these posts online, it's interesting. I see my current clients liking the posts because they're seeing the results. So I say this to try and challenge you to get out there, find something and hook it. The minute that it's not working, I will go to LinkedIn and I'll fall on my sword and I will tell every single last person. But point being, the difference here is you can, and one last comment, and then I will move on from this horrible self-righteous monologue. But I get asked the question a lot, can AI replace sales development? And the truth is that if you're running relevant only templates, it can. I can use Marketo to send out emails that are one-to-many. That's what marketing is. What you need a human for is something like personalization. So I would almost challenge you, if you want to run a relevance only playbook, put together your best relevant templates, send them out through Marketo, put them in your name. You can even make it look like you sent it. Send them out in your name in tandem with doing personalized messaging. So if you don't, believe me, I would just say you don't need a human being to actually be doing relevance only templates. So I'd say, how most of the programs are most people are doing it, unfortunately, I would just at least, beg you to cross analyze and say, like, run both, run the relevance only through Marketo, only use a human for the stuff that a human needs to do. That was the longest diatribe I think I've been on in my entire career. Just kidding. It wasn't even the longest one today. Okay, 3 parts of any hook. There are 3 parts to a hook that I developed with the team. So the first part of the hook, essentially, I want you to think of it in 3 different parts, and we're going to go into examples. The first part to the hook, I would tie 2 to 3 words from the excerpt into the first part of the line. So if you can't if you can't bold 2 to 3 words from the excerpt that you use of, like, hey, Beck, I noticed that you went on an awful 8-minute rant on why personalization is the way to be. One line that stood out to me was X. If you can't bold 2 to 3 words in that and rebold the exact same 2 to 3 words in the first part of the second sentence, then essentially I would argue you haven't hooked it well enough. So the goal of that portion is to prove to your prospect that you've hooked it. to some degree, at least for the first part. People are watching, and they're very, very smart. If you don't believe me, I watched a video the other day of a guy basically saying like, I feel like there was some confusion. He was going into all of these like really high level things that we say in the workplace and how he was feeling behind the email. Just want to bubble this to the top of your inbox. And he's like, will you freaking respond? The will you freaking respond side of us, that's the real us. And that's who you're trying to talk to on your prospect end, is who they really are. So the real reader of your emails, they have seen it all. They've been sold to before, and so I would say they are by and large looking at your prospecting emails, especially if you're selling into sales, to see how you did what you did. So the importance of hooking those 2 to 3 words is you're proving to your prospect that you didn't just tease out that excerpt for any reason, that it is the perfect time and it is the perfect place and you are here for a reason. They said this thing, and this thing is so relevant to you that you couldn't handle it anymore. You had to reach out. So the first piece of that is essentially, I would say, reordering those 2 to 3 words in the first part of the sentence, and that you can put commas in between for these different portions. So the second part is going to be basically, I see that there are 4 questions in the Q&A, but for some reason it's not letting me pile them up. So everyone who has put questions in the Q&A, if you could put them in the chat and I can see them there, I had that pulled up. The second portion of the hook is going to be navigating your way back to the buyer persona by giving them a leading indicator of their main business impact. The biggest mistake that I see, not with personalization, but with people pitching their products in general, is they do not pitch it in terms of the context of what that person cares about, number one. There's usually number one thing that that person cares about. So for instance, BDR leaders, the only thing they care about is meetings. More meetings, sometimes higher quality meetings, but more meetings, because that's how they are paid. Sales leaders, they care about quota attainment. So if you're talking about how you can speed up yada, 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 I would translate to them, how does that relate to quota attainment? Even if you can make my day easier as a BDR leader, but it doesn't help me increase meetings, then like, I don't really care. So the biggest thing that I would say you need to focus on is, what is the main thing that my person is metriced on as a buyer persona? So for instance, marketers, it's going to be MQLs. I'm not going to go into that. It's just going to make me mad. But MQLs being defined as whoever downloads content is a marketing qualified lead. Ta-da. Whatever. I'm not going to go into it. I'm going on a diatribe diet. But essentially the one thing that they are metriced on is probably likely the one thing they care about. So CROs, it's revenue. Now that might break down to, they want to reduce churn within their customer success line. They want, to sell bigger deals. They want to sell more deals. They want to increase their close ratio. They want to increase their pipeline, the amount of at-bats that they have, the amount of MQLs that are coming through. But the CRO, what they care about is they are paid to make revenue go that way. So if they don't make revenue go that way, then they are on the curb with, one of those boxes and a bottle of whiskey that's half drank and some little flower that's wilted for some reason. That's what a CRO is metriced on. So I would think about the business impact. That's a one thing that your person, your buyer persona cares about. And I would put that at the end of the statement, say, and blank as a result, and drive more meetings as a result, and drive more revenue as a result, and close more deals as a result, and, whatever, increase revenue as a result. And the middle portion, I would give a leading indicator of that business impact. So consulting game is wild, by the way, for anyone who eventually goes into it. People care about, there are 4 different things that are leading, that people are usually thinking about: business impact, lagging indicators of that business impact, leading indicators of that business impact, and variable inputs. Business impact for an SDR leader, for instance, would be meetings booked. Lagging indicator would be response rates, reply rates to emails. Leading indicator would be open rates for those emails. And the variable input would be the quality of that email or the volume of that email. People, for some reason, care about leading indicators and lagging indicators even more so often than they care about the business impact. People want to know about response rates. People want to know about, whatever, open rates, etc. What's the one email subject line that's going to drive more open rates? So I would be thinking about, in this last part of the hook, I'm just going to say and blank as a result, and I'm going to state the one positive outcome that they want as a buyer persona. And in that middle section, I would say blank, and give them a leading indicator. What's the leading indicator or lagging indicator that would stack up to that business impact? So, let's say someone wrote a article on, how to scale team or quality messaging. I said, hey, Brian, or hey, Grace, reason for my outreach is I saw you wrote this article on LinkedIn where you're talking about scaling teams effectively, and you said it all comes down to quality. What if you could increase the quality of the reps, conversations your sales reps are having, drive more, produce more open rates because of it, and drive more booked meetings as a result? So I'd say the one outcome needs to usually stay the same for every single buyer persona of like drive more meetings result, drive more meetings result, drive more meetings result. And I would back into the math of what's a leading indicator that in the context of this email that they would care about. So open rates, reply rates, etc. By the way, I did a sneaky thing on the database, and some of you might have realized who are in the room, but essentially I sent out a email calling everyone by the wrong first name. And then the exact same email calling everyone with the right first name, and to blow up the myth that reply rates and open rates mean something. And the open rates and reply rates, obviously where I called people the wrong name, were unbelievably astronomical. I'm going to probably publish about it tomorrow. But point being, people care about lagging and leading indicators. So I would, the more that you can nail that midsection where you say like, tie 2 to 3 words, state a leading indicator of the business impact, and say and blank as a result, and give their business impact, then you should be good. So that's the standard of any hook. And that should be the second sentence from my perspective of the email. So first, line is reason for my outreach, and it's a personalization, put quotes around it. If you can put quotes around it, it means you personalized. Not in all cases will you have quotes, but I would make sure that you read that first line and you think, oh, if I were that prospect, I would know that this is personalized to me. The second line should be the hook. You should tie 2 to 3 words, state a leading or lagging indicator, and say and blank as a result, and talk about the one thing that they're metriced about or care about. How to hook on actual words. So there's 2 ways to hook. There's 2 case scenarios. I'm gonna make sure I stay on time. We got 12 minutes. 2 case scenarios. Number 1, where you'll have your prospect's words, and number 2, where you won't. So, and I'll give you an example of each of them, but how to hook on actual words. Your webinar should be 2 hours. Thank you, Brian. That means a lot to me. See, this is self-authored content. He just said it would be valuable. And I'm like, Brian, do you want my car? I don't have a car, by the way, but point being, in the first case scenario where you actually have the prospect's words. So for instance, a webinar, a post, a article that they wrote, something that they engaged with, that they liked, that they shared, that they commented on, or self-identified traits, whether that's company line, profile line, headline, you have the actual words that they wrote. Or in the company bucket, if you're hooking on what their company said about themselves, which is a rich section for people who, it's kind of like the catch-all. The company wrote something about themselves, and you can usually find something in there. You'll have an actual quote. There are some cases where you won't. Like for instance, if you're going into junk drawer and they played basketball at Stanford, you're hooking on concept that they went to Stanford, and played basketball, but you don't have an actual quote. So let's start with how to hook on actual words if you have the actual words, because that's most common. So there are 3 ways that I've seen that you can do this. Number 1, you can start a statement with, what if you could? Imagine if you could, and I have an idea on how you could. I like the third one the best. That's preference. But 1 and 2, some people have said who are sending it that they don't like it. I've never gotten someone saying that who they received it that didn't like it, because their mind is so blown that you knew who they were. They're not worried about the what if you could. But the third one is my favorite. But essentially, You know, if you have actual words of your prospect, you can say, what if you could, you know, have quality conversations like you talked in your article, you know, increase open rates because of it and drive more booked meetings as a result. Imagine you could, you know, blank like you talked in your article, increase blank and blank as a result. That's if you have the actual prospect's words. Johnny, I'm going to answer this. I don't remember if you mentioned already, but do the response rates of buckets 4 or 5 beat out using the relevant demographic info? Yes, they do. Personalization, regardless of the bucket. And again, this is in my experience. My open rates, and keep in mind my subject lines were personalized too. Kind of a quick, I know this isn't a subject line session, but a quick low hanging fruit is if you say your article on, and you put the quotes in there, comma, their first name, dot, dot, dot. Our response, you're going to think I'm such a prick, which is probably the truth. Our open rates were at minimum, very, very minimum, 45. Typical for us was 65 to 70. And the good reps were getting into 85, 90% open rate. Not that it's all about open rates, but how they were doing it essentially at the beginning, I basically said, like, hey, if you have personalized, because I gave them a quota, I said, hey, if you're personalized, I want 30 emails and 60 dials at minimum. If you're not personalized, I want 100 each. Not because I'm the snow queen, because those are the numbers that are going to get you there. And how I'm going to marker them essentially as a quick look is in your subject line, is it personalized? Because if your email is personalized, you can't personalize the subject line without personalizing the email. So their subject lines, you know, would be like your article on blank. That's how it started. And it was driving these massive open rates because people are like, they are scrolling through in their email in the morning. This is what I do every morning. Come into the email, you know, and I'm like scrolling through to delete all the marketing stuff, all the stuff that's not to me. I'm trying to delete and get out of my way. You know, your prospects are doing the same. So you want to look non-marketing-y, and a great way to do that is talk about something personalized in your subject line. But what if you could, imagine if you could, I have an idea on how you could, is the 3 ways you can start it. If you don't have words, and I'll give you one example and then we can, I'll answer 2 more questions and we can close out. If you don't have actual words of your prospect, and again, this is going to be, for instance, if they went to Stanford or junk drawer, or, you know, any kind of, skill endorsements, that's a trap, by the way. It's quick to personalize on skill endorsements, but it's again, it's in bucket 4, so it's not going to work quite as well. But if you don't have actual words of the prospect, then essentially what you want to do is rock climb your way there. So what I mean by that is rock climbing, the difficulty of the wall is predicated on how often there are grips and how big are the grips. So the more the grip and more grips there are, you know, that you can hold on to on the wall, and the bigger they are, essentially the easier it is to climb it. So the great thing about if you don't have words of the prospect, if you do it in the correct manner, you can lay the hook wherever you want. But you just look brilliant. So step 1 is I would always lead with, especially if they play basketball and you play basketball, let me get ahead of this. I would not talk about your experience playing basketball. They don't care about your experience. They care about themselves. So I wouldn't be like, oh my gosh, you know, whatever, go get your eyebrows waxed at Benefit. Me too. Let's talk about it. Now it's all about me. I would say, if you're going to talk about basketball, you know, as a concept, you essentially need to state truths of what you know about basketball, contexted or preluded by the line of I'd imagine that, and correct me if I'm wrong. Because if you try to tell them about something they've done, they become animals. Again, at the base of psychology, people are going to rebel against whatever you tell them. Your prospects very much included. If you tell them you're awesome, the first thing they're going to want to do is take you down. If you tell them, if you trip in front of them, the first thing they want to do is pick you up. So people rebel. It's in their psychology. You have 3 ego states. I won't go too much into it, but they're going to rebel against whatever you say. So get them to rebel in the right direction. So a closing technique that I've used in the past is I used to say like, okay, someone's like, oh, this all looks good. And then I'm like, okay, great. So let's sign. And they're like, let's talk about CS. And, let me take a step back here. They'd be like, this all looks great. And I'd be like, you sound like it's an 8 out of 10. What would take it to a 10 out of 10? What am I missing? Why would you not sign this deal? And then they're like, no, it actually all looks great. Let's go ahead and let's talk about deployment, blah, blah. I'm like, are you sure? And they're like, yeah, I'm sure. And then they sign on the dotted line. So I'd always lay the hook where you want them to rebel against. So if you tell someone to correct you if you're wrong, the first thing they're not going to want to do is correct you. So I would lay the hook or lay the grip essentially of, saw you went to Stanford to play basketball. Correct me if I'm wrong, but skill a D1 basketball, I imagine, would come down to practice, repetition, and technique. What if you could increase the technique of your sales reps on the phone, drive more open rates and then book more meetings as a result? So essentially you are sandwiching, you're doing what you are doing with the words here, but you're putting quote unquote words in their mouth, sandwich with, correct me if I'm wrong, or I'd imagine that. So there's a sense of humility in that, and they will not correct you. And they'll think it's really charming. So step one, step two, lay the grip with, I'd imagine that, or correct me if I'm wrong, and put the principle that you're about to hook into. That's the grip. You can lay the fattest grip ever right near the top of the wall, and then you just hook into the grip that you just laid for yourself. So I almost prefer when there's not words of the prospect. It's less work on me. I can conceptualize whatever, and I'd let your minds go wild. You are here on this line right now because you're driven. I know that. I would never sit on a webinar of someone else if I was not driven and I wanted to level up and get better. So I would say without a shadow of a doubt, you have a lot of creativity in you. So start pushing it out. Start seeing how creative you can get, how funny you can get, how witty you can get, how pattern interrupted you can get, and your prospects won't even know what to say. I was spiffing my reps on job offers. If you got a job offer, I'd give you $150, a gift card of $150 if someone offered you a job. So you'll start to see the responses from these prospects. They'll be like, that's the best prospecting email I've ever seen. Will this one day change if a whole bunch of people start personalizing? Maybe, but I know that we're not going to see mass adoption. It's harder, right? So for now, I'd say for at least the next bucket 5 years, you're going to be fine just deploying this approach across the board. You're going to see people that their mind is blown that you knew something about them. One example, we don't really have time for an example. I'm going to send out the deck afterwards. Essentially, I did 3 examples. We do have time. Okay, I'm going to do 1 example and then scroll it back up here and answer 2 questions, and we'll close out at 5 after. Is that a deal? Prolixity is my strength. So I use 3 different examples in this deck, and you can go back and look at them. I use David Cancel, basically 3 people that I'm a massive fangirl of. David Cancel, he's the CEO over at Drift. Manny Medina, he's the CEO over at Outreach, and Ed Kalnin over at Seismic. He's the CEO over at Seismic. So David Cancel, and I essentially did this with my 5-minute rule, that I needed to find 3 personalized premises in under 5 minutes. So I went to David's profile and I'm like, I'm going to sell sales training, essentially like as if it were me. So he wrote an article, I quickly clipped it. Want to grow in your career, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I am like, there's got to be something in here I could do. And here is one of his quotes that he said. There's no sitting still. If you linger just trying to preserve what's working so far without taking chances to grow, then you're not going anywhere. So I essentially said, what if you could ensure your reps at Drift weren't sitting still in terms of improving on their sales calls, taking the chance to grow to make each discovery call better than the one before, and drive more close-won deals as a result. He's the CEO. He wants to win deals, especially against their competition. Everyone wants to win deals against their competition. They think their competition is the devil and they're the hero, and they want to take home that deal. So I highlighted here just so you could see in terms of structure. Here's the what if you could. The sitting still was where I quoted him back to him, and I did it twice, taking the chance to grow. So I would bold this or quote this so that he understands. You make it easy on them to understand that you hooked it, to make each discovery call better than the one before. So this is a leading indicator of close-won deals is better discovery calls. and drive more close won deals as a result. So, you know, point being, I did this, I kid you not, I think in 30 seconds that I'm just like, I'm in the structure. It's going to be hard at the beginning. You're going to have to get used to it of like, I'm just cranking out these, you know, you give me that you like grilling. I'm all, you know, it all comes down to flavors. What if you can increase the flavors, great flavors of your sales conversations? You know, you talk about whatever wine, I'm talking about highlighting the best ingredients, you know, like there's virtually nothing that you can't get creative with. So I'd say I challenge you guys, you know, to use that amazing brain that you are gifted with. You know, again, I can't imagine being on a webinar watching, you know, you're driven, you're creative, so leverage it, use it. So that's the only example I'm going to cover. Why don't I answer one or two of these questions, then we can close out for the day. If my company, I'm going to take Brian, I'm going to field this one. If my company only pays me when I get a meeting with a director, CXO, VP, and higher, would you recommend me to personalize or stick with relevance for a lower level? Wait, so they only pay you to get CXO, VP, or director level higher? I would do that. You know, my general opinion and how I've changed orgs is essentially I did a point system to help them understand that managers are important. Flip the Script was built not on important people, quote unquote, important people. It was built as an after-hour series with a bunch of individual contributors. I'm like, don't forget who has the power, right? So individual contributors can influence a deal, and so can lower level managers, et cetera. That is my general opinion, and I do think it's smart to have them involved. And I would always let data do the talking. Of the first meeting, I would go and run a report in my CRM and say, for all the closed won deals, what was the first meeting? What did it look like? Who was it with in terms of level of role and discipline of role? Were there multiple people? And what did that look like? Define good using data, not opinion. The biggest beast in the game. Define good, what good looks like according to what the data tells you, and throw out your opinion. There's an org I worked for, you know, they said VP of sales only. And I'm like, other people are important, like sales enablement and manager. And they're like, no, VP only. I'm like, okay, let's do a point system. I'll only give them 0.25 for a manager of sales enablement. All right, fine, Beck, you can do it. Did it so I could get the data. Turns out VP's a customer success were our fastest sales cycle. Wouldn't have known that because they didn't open the funnel. So, you know, point being, if they're only paying you for a higher level, you can either fight the KPI system, you know, you can use my videos to do it, send them to me, or, you know, I would essentially, you know, they gamify the system of your comp according to CXO, VP, or higher director, then they're paying you to not worry about the lower level. So I would stick there. I'll do one last one from Nick Coffin. What's your opinion on leveraging LinkedIn when doing personalized outreach? Very good question and good final question. So to me, another concept that gets strewn about, the pearls get strewn about on LinkedIn is social selling. Everyone seems to have written the master playbook. So to me, social selling is one of three things. Usually they're talking about the first one, but the first type of social selling is you creating content within your industry vertical to attract buyers from an inbound perspective. I'm going to go on record. I do not think that one is worth it, especially as an SDR or an account executive. I think there are much faster ways to dictate pipeline, especially you're creating inbound demand for your brand, which if you're an outbound rep, then there's a chance that they inbound because of your content and you don't get credit for it. Whoops. But I do not think that the brand building is worth it. I think it's worth it for consultants or one-person shops. But if I was an individual contributor, I would not just sit there and publish all this content all the times that that's my general opinion. People are going to burn me at the stake for it, but I think personal branding is a wash, is my general opinion. The second type of social selling would be using LinkedIn as a medium of I'm going to sell via LinkedIn. My opinion there would be the number one thing that makes people mad from what I have heard, you know, that I always hear people talking about is the bait and pitch, what I call the bait and pitch. I'm going to coin that. Basically, you add someone on LinkedIn, you're like, I'd love to network together. And then you're like, so you want to buy my stuff or like what? That's the number one thing that can make people mad. It's a very low, in terms of conversion, especially if you're not personalized. If I were going to do it right off the bat, which let me be clear, I wouldn't suggest, I would suggest you add the person at the first step of the sequence. Right, Grace, bingo, immediate unconnect. I'll block them sometimes if I have the time. I can smell them from a mile away. They're like, we might have some mutual. I'm like, we're not going to have mutual anything. I am ignoring this. So I would say my general LinkedIn theory is do not spend the time to write a personalized or write a message in the like to send over the connection for prospecting, of like, that's the quickest way to get me to know what you want. So I would basically add all of them at the first step. At the first step, you're again getting 3 personalized premises. You're then, saving them into your sales engagement if you have one. And you are gleaning out people who your CRM data isn't going to be clean. So you're kicking out accounts that essentially, or you're kicking out the people that aren't any longer at the company or aren't in the right role, and you're saving the 3 personalized premises, and then you're going on from there. So at that point, you're already there on LinkedIn. I'd send him a connection request, and then I'd organically, there's no way to do it systematically from what I know. Please don't blow me up with product pitches. Is I would organically just like, comment, share, be genuine, like, comment, or share on their stuff that they are sharing. Know what's in their world. Socially listen. Use it to engage with them. I can tell you I know who Brian Lee is. I know who Sunny is. Right? Sunny, verified first. I can tell you where these people work because you're paying attention if you create this level of content. So I'd organic, like, comment, etc. Find it as a way to engage with them. And then right around, I would say step, for me, I do 16 steps over 21 business days, and then I will end the session, I promise. 16 steps over 21 business days. And right around 5 of them are cold calls, 1's a LinkedIn research step, and 10 cold calls, 2 with voicemails. I would say the LinkedIn step of or prospecting over LinkedIn as a medium, I would do it somewhere around like step 12, 13, 14, to the people who've added you back. If they haven't added you back, just, keep going in the normal cadence. But if they added you back and they aren't, especially if they aren't opening the emails and you haven't got a connection, essentially you're not on the board yet. They don't know who you are. So I would I would couch it for them. I sent this to you over email, but, and then I would do the personalization. For the love of everything that is holy, please be personalized. Otherwise, you're going to turn so many, especially if it's a decision maker, and especially if it's one of those lower, like director level, they're going to get pissed. So I would say that would be my personal best in practice. Usually out of the book that we were booking, 40% was over dial, 40% was over email, 20% was over social, and it was on that step. And then the third type of social selling that I have seen the most often is using the LinkedIn data on social to fuel the other channels. That's my preferred method. I'm a little bit older school, and that I think you should call from 8 to 5. I think you should play within the rules and boundaries of, you should respect someone, essentially. Don't call them Sunday night, even if you get a connect. Like, I just don't think it's appropriate, is my opinion. So I would use the LinkedIn data to fuel the other channels. I would try to be as respectful as I can on LinkedIn, like, comment, etc. Ship them an email around, again, step 12, 13, like you've known them for a little bit. I wouldn't send any language over in the connection request, and then go from there. So that is everything. Thanks so much, everybody, for coming to this session. This is the first session. I was super nervous about it, so I just can't thank you enough. If you like this session, please, again, I'm trying to spend $0 on marketing, and if you like the session, invite your friends, post on LinkedIn. It's what helps me more than anything, is posting on LinkedIn and getting people involved, because I want to make this a we sport. It is not a me sport. And I want to, really leverage this and turn this into community. So thanks everyone for watching. I will be sending out the deck afterwards and look forward to seeing you all soon. Toodaloo.